The sun hadn't even cleared the ridge when Mary Haskell felt the heat begin to crawl across her skin like something alive. She stood at the threshold of the town diner, her two children pressed against her back, Clara, barely 6, gripping her mother's skirt with tiny fists, and Samuel, 9 years old, but already carrying the weight of a man in his eyes. Through the dusty window, Mary could see men eating breakfast, men who used to tip their hats to her husband. Now they wouldn't even look her way. The door swung open, and the smell of frying bacon hit her like a memory she couldn't afford. Inside, conversations died. Boots scraped against wood. The owner, a heavy man with eyes like stones, set down his rag and crossed his arms. "We're full up today," he said, though 3 tables sat empty, and the coffee pot was still half full. Mary's voice came out dry as the cracked earth beneath her feet. "We only need a bit of bread. The little ones are faint." But before the owner could refuse again, a voice cut through the silence like a knife through silk. "Let them sit with me." The man in the corner booth wore a dust-coated coat and a hat that shadowed half his face. His eyes were gray, not cold but distant, like they'd seen too much to focus on anything for long. He reached into his coat, pulled out a handful of silver coins dulled by time and travel, and slid them across the counter. "That should cover more than bread." Mary hesitated. Pride burned in her throat, but Samuel tugged her sleeve. "Mama, please." Each step toward that booth felt like surrender. But surrender to what? The stranger shifted his plate aside as they sat down, and when Clara finally stopped crying, he spoke just 2 words. Eli Carter. Mary didn't give her name. Names, she'd learned, could bind or betray. They ate in silence, thick bread, eggs, potatoes that tasted like heaven after 3 days of walking. When they finished, Eli leaned back and studied her with those gray eyes. "You came from the East Road." "Yes. That's rough country. River's near gone dry this time of year." "It was." He nodded slowly, as if weighing something invisible. "You've nowhere to go tonight, do you?" Mary's spine went rigid. "We'll find a place." His smile was faint, almost sad. "Not in this town, you won't. Folks here got long memories and short grace." He paused, letting the words settle. "Your man, he one of the Haskells from Black Creek." The air shifted. Mary felt every gaze in the diner turn back toward them. "He was." "Then they won't help you. Not after what happened with the claim." The truth hit her like a fist. Her husband's name had followed her farther than she thought possible. Eli leaned forward, voice dropping low. "I got a small camp outside town. You and the little ones can rest there. I ain't asking anything for it." Mary looked at her children, then at the window where the morning light had turned white and merciless. Pride didn't feed a child. Pride didn't mend blistered feet. "All right," she whispered. But as they walked out into the brutal sunlight, Mary couldn't shake the feeling she'd just made either the best decision of her life or the worst. They left town by the west road where the fields thinned to scrub and the horizon broke open into miles of nothing. Eli led a bay mare that carried the children while Mary walked beside them, her shoes nearly worn through. The heat pressed down like a hand trying to suffocate them, but Eli never once looked back to see if they were keeping up. He just rode ahead, steady and silent, like a man who'd learned that words rarely changed anything. When the sun began to sink, they reached his camp, a small clearing tucked against a stand of cottonwoods beside a dry creek bed. A canvas tent, a fire pit lined with stones, a lean-to for the horses. It was humble, almost nothing, yet it felt like a palace compared to the cold ground they'd slept on the night before. Eli swung down from his saddle and helped Samuel dismount. "You can rest here," he said simply. "I'll fetch water from what's left of the creek." Mary nodded, setting down her small bundle. The air cooled as darkness crept in, and for the first time in days, she felt something like safety. But safety, she knew, was always temporary. When Eli returned with a tin cup of water, warm, tasting of earth and iron, he sat across the fire from her. "You've come far," he said. "Where were you headed?" "Nowhere certain." Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. "My husband died last winter. The land was taken soon after. They said the papers weren't in order." Eli stared into the flames, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite swallow. "Belonging is a strange thing," he said finally. "Sometimes the land claims us, sometimes it spits us out." Mary looked at him then, really looked. "And which was it for you?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Bit of both, I reckon. I worked cattle south of here for a while. Then the herd was lost to fever. After that, I kept moving." Samuel, who'd been quiet until now, asked softly, "Mister, do you live here alone?" Eli looked at the boy and nodded. "For some time now. Used to be a woman with me. She's gone." "Gone where?" Mary asked before she could stop herself. He took a long breath. "Buried near the foothills. Fever took her. Same year as my brother." The silence that followed was heavy with ghosts. Mary wrapped her arms around her knees, the firelight trembling across her face. "I'm sorry." "World don't give much choice," Eli said quietly. "Just keeps moving whether we stand or fall." She understood that better than most. Later, after the children had fallen asleep, Eli returned with a small tin of beans and 2 pieces of jerky. "Ain't much, but it'll do." Mary accepted the food, feeling its warmth ground her to this moment, this place. "Why'd you help us?" she asked. He poked at the fire. "Because someone once did the same for me." "And what did it cost you?" His eyes caught the glow of the dying fire. "Everything I thought I didn't need." The words settled between them like dust, quiet, lasting, impossible to brush away. Mary turned them over in her mind until the stars came out, until the sky stretched so wide it hurt to look at. When Eli finally spoke again, his voice was soft, almost tender. "You and the children can stay a while if you mind to. There's work enough, fencing, hauling, small things. I could use a hand. We wouldn't want to be a burden." He shook his head. "You'd be company. That's different." For the first time in months, Mary felt something stir beneath the weight of all she'd lost, a faint, trembling thread of hope. She looked toward her children, sleeping soundly for once, and then at the man who'd given them rest without demand or judgment. "All right," she said. Eli nodded, stoking the fire one last time. "Then we'll see what tomorrow brings." But what tomorrow brought was something neither of them expected. Morning rose pale and slow, pulling the land out of shadow. Mary woke to the sound of Eli chopping wood, each strike steady, deliberate, the rhythm of a man used to work and solitude. The children still slept beneath the blanket, their faces peaceful in the slanted light. She stepped outside and poured herself coffee from the pot Eli had left warming by the fire. The taste was bitter, but it steadied her shaking hands. "You keep this camp long?" she asked. "Few months," Eli said, setting the axe aside. "I take work when it comes, mostly out toward the mines or ranches that need driving done. Some days it's just this." He gestured toward the open plain, the scattered scrub, the thin smoke curling upward. "Not much to it, but it's quiet." "Quiet's not a bad thing." He studied her for a moment. "You were raised around here?" Mary shook her head. "Further east, near the river before it changed course. My father ran a small mill there. When the floods came, the land was gone. We moved, kept moving. Then I met Thomas." Your husband. Yes, her voice faltered. He wanted to make something of his own. Said the West was full of promise, but promise don't fill a man's belly. Eli looked away, understanding too well. He worked the claim that got seized. She nodded. The papers weren't right. He couldn't read much, and the man who filed them took advantage. When Thomas got sick, I tried to hold the land, but the sheriff came, said it belonged to another now. There was no anger in her tone, only the dry, worn ache of someone who'd run out of tears. By midday, the camp came alive with small purpose. Eli showed Samuel how to haul wood and tie it in bundles. Clara helped her mother wash clothes in the shallow trickle of the creek. The girl laughed when a frog leapt across her foot, a sound so pure and unexpected that it startled Mary, a sound she hadn't heard in so long it felt almost foreign. Eli watched from a distance, leaning on the fence he was mending. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of caution and quiet admiration. He wasn't a man who spoke his heart, but his silences said enough. That evening, as the sky burned orange and violet, Eli brought out a small harmonica. He played slow, halting notes, an old tune half remembered. The sound drifted through the clearing, filling the space where words would have failed. Clara leaned against Mary's shoulder, her eyes heavy. Samuel sat cross-legged near the fire, listening as if he were learning the shape of something sacred. Mary closed her eyes and let the music carry her. Each note felt like a thread pulling her back toward something human, something whole. When the tune ended, Eli set the harmonica down. "She used to like that song," he said quietly. "The woman I told you about." Mary didn't speak. She knew that kind of grief, where memory becomes both wound and comfort. "Eli," she said after a while, her voice almost a whisper, "do you believe people can start again after everything?" He poked at the fire, watching the sparks rise. "Don't know if we start again. I think we just keep walking till something in us decides to stop running." Mary nodded, staring into the flames. "Maybe that's enough." He met her gaze then, steady, unflinching. "For most folks it is." But just as the night grew deep and still, just as Mary began to believe they might actually find peace here, the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. Not one horse, several. And they were getting closer. Eli was on his feet before Mary could even stand. His hand moved to the rifle leaning against the tent, and his entire body went rigid with a tension she hadn't seen before. "Get the children inside," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Don't come out till I say." Mary's heart hammered in her chest as she gathered Clara and Samuel, pulling them into the tent. Through the canvas, she could hear the horses drawing nearer, the jangle of spurs, the creak of leather, voices low and rough. "You Eli Carter?" a man's voice called out. "Depends who's asking," Eli replied, stepping into view with his rifle cradled in his arms. "Name's Wade Caldwell. I own the land 3 miles east of here. Heard you're harboring a woman who owes me money." Mary's blood went cold. Caldwell, the man who'd stolen her husband's claim, the man who destroyed everything they'd built. "She don't owe you nothing," Eli said evenly. "Land was taken illegal. You know it, and I know it." Caldwell laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Law says different. Sheriff's got the papers. Woman's husband signed over his claim before he died, and she owes compensation for the crops we lost when she abandoned it." "That's a lie," Mary whispered to herself, her hands shaking. "Even if that were true," Eli said, his voice like steel, "she's got no money to give you." "Then maybe she's got something else." Caldwell's tone turned oily, suggestive. "Pretty woman like that, alone with 2 young ones. I'm sure we could work something out." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Eli's voice cut through it, cold and final. You got 3 seconds to ride off my land before I make sure you never ride anywhere again." Caldwell chuckled, but there was an edge to it now. "Your land? You're squatting same as her, Carter. Don't think I won't remember this." 2 seconds. The horses shifted nervously. Mary heard the creak of saddles, the murmur of Caldwell's men, then finally the sound of hooves retreating into the darkness. When Eli ducked back into the tent, his face was pale but determined. "Pack what you can carry," he said. "We need to leave before sunrise." "Why?" Samuel asked, his voice small. Eli looked at the boy, then at Mary. "Because Caldwell's not the type to let this go. He'll come back with more men, and next time he won't bother talking." Mary's mind raced. They'd just found safety, just begun to breathe again, and now they had to run. Again. "Where will we go?" "North," Eli said. "I know a place. It's rough country, but it's defensible. We can hold out there till things cool down." "And if they don't cool down?" He met her eyes, and in them she saw the truth he didn't want to speak. "Then we make our stand." But before Mary could respond, Clara let out a small gasp. "Mama, look." Through the tent flap, they could see fire on the horizon. Not the warm glow of a campfire. This was something bigger, angrier, spreading fast. "He's burning the east fields," Eli said, his jaw tight. "Trying to flush out anyone hiding there. Won't be long before he circles back." Mary grabbed her children, her mind screaming with panic. But when she looked at Eli, she saw something that stopped her cold. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. "There's another way," he said slowly. "But it's dangerous." "What way?" He hesitated, then spoke words that would change everything. "We fight." The decision hung in the air like smoke. Fight. The word tasted foreign on Mary's tongue, impossible. She was a widow with 2 small children. What did she know about fighting men like Caldwell, men with guns, men with power, men who believed the world owed them everything? But then she looked at Samuel, whose jaw was set in that way that reminded her so much of Thomas. She looked at Clara, who'd stopped crying and was watching her mother with eyes that held too much understanding for a 6-year-old. And she looked at Eli, this stranger who'd shown them more kindness in 3 days than her own town had shown in 3 years. "How?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Eli moved quickly, his mind already working through the plan. "Caldwell's got maybe 6, 7 men with him. They'll expect us to run, not to dig in. That's our advantage." He grabbed a stick and began drawing in the dirt. "This ridge here, it overlooks the road. If we position ourselves right, we can see them coming long before they see us." "And then what?" Mary asked. "We have 1 rifle." "I've got 2, Eli corrected. "And a shotgun. Plus I know this land better than they do." He looked up at her, his gray eyes intense. "But I need to know you're with me on this. Once we start, there's no going back." Mary swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect her children, to avoid violence at all costs. But another voice, quieter, deeper, reminded her of something Thomas used to say. "Sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to stand your ground." "We're with you," she said. What she didn't know was that Eli Carter had been waiting his whole life for someone to stand with him. And what neither of them knew was that Caldwell had already sent riders ahead to cut off the northern route. They were surrounded, and sunrise was only hours away. The trap was closing. They worked through the night with a desperate urgency. Eli showed Samuel how to stack rocks to create a low barrier on the ridge, not enough to stop bullets, but enough to provide cover. Mary gathered every pot, pan, and piece of metal she could find, arranging them in the trees to catch the light and create the illusion of more defenders than there actually were. "Old cavalry trick," Eli explained as he checked the rifles. Make them think twice about charging. Clara, despite her young age, was given a task too, to stay hidden in a hollow beneath the roots of a massive cottonwood and to make noise, bang sticks, throw rocks, anything to create confusion, only when Eli gave the signal. "Can you do that, sweetheart?" Mary asked, her heart breaking at what she was asking of her daughter. Clara nodded solemnly. "I can be brave, Mama." God help us, Mary thought. We're teaching children to be soldiers. As the first gray light touched the horizon, Eli positioned himself at the highest point of the ridge, his rifle across his knees. Mary crouched behind the rock barrier with the shotgun, her hands slick with sweat. Samuel was 20 yards to the left with a pile of rocks and instructions to throw them as hard as he could if anyone got too close. The waiting was agony. Every bird call made Mary's heart leap. Every rustle of wind through the scrub grass sounded like approaching footsteps. And then, just as the sun broke free of the distant mountains, she heard it. Horses, many horses. Eli raised his hand, a signal to stay quiet, stay low. Through the gaps in the rocks, Mary could see them now. Caldwell riding at the front with at least 10 men behind him, not the 6 or 7 Eli had estimated. Her stomach dropped. They were outnumbered. Badly. Caldwell pulled his horse to a stop about 50 yards from the camp. "Carter," he shouted. "I know you're up there. You and that Haskell woman. This doesn't have to end bloody. Just hand her over, and we'll call it square." Eli didn't respond. Mary could see the muscle working in his jaw, could see him calculating angles, distances, odds. "Come on, Carter," Caldwell continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "You really want to die for some widow who ain't nothing to you? For kids that ain't even yours?" Still, Eli said nothing, but his finger moved to the trigger. "Last chance," Caldwell called. "I'm counting to 3. 1. Mary's hands tightened on the shotgun. 2. She looked at Samuel, who was watching her with eyes full of trust, full of faith that his mother would somehow make this right. The shot cracked through the morning air like thunder, and Caldwell's hat flew off his head. He hadn't been hit, Eli had deliberately missed. But the message was clear. No surrender. For a moment, everything was frozen. Then Caldwell's face twisted with rage. "Take them!" he roared. And hell descended on the ridge. The first wave came hard and fast. Caldwell's men charged up the slope, firing wildly, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. Eli's rifle spoke again and again, each shot deliberate, precise. One rider fell, then another. The rest scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and scrub brush. Mary fired the shotgun at a man who'd gotten too close. The recoil nearly knocked her backwards, and she wasn't sure if she'd hit him or not. The sound was deafening, the smell of gunpowder choking. Beside her, Samuel threw rocks with surprising accuracy, hitting one rider square in the face and causing his horse to rear. "Reload!" Eli shouted. "Mary, reload!" Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the shells, but somehow she got them into the chambers. Another rider charged, and this time she didn't hesitate. The shotgun roared, and the man tumbled from his saddle. "I just shot a man," her mind whispered. "I just killed someone." But there was no time to process it, no time for guilt or horror, only survival. Caldwell had pulled back, regrouping his men. Eli took the opportunity to slide down next to Mary. "They're going to try to flank us," he said, breathing hard. "Circle around through the creek bed. I need you to move to that position." He pointed to a cluster of boulders. "And watch the left side. Can you do that?" Mary nodded, not trusting her voice. "And Mary?" He gripped her arm. "Whatever happens, protect the children. That's all that matters." Before she could respond, he was gone, scrambling back to his position. And in that moment, Mary realized something that made her blood run cold. Eli wasn't planning to survive this. He was planning to buy them time to escape. But she also realized something else, something that filled her with a fierce, burning determination. She wasn't running anymore. The second wave came from two directions. 4 men charged the front while 3 more tried to sneak through the creek bed, exactly as Eli had predicted. Mary saw them coming, raised the shotgun, and fired before they even knew she was there. One went down immediately. The other 2 scattered, but one caught a rock from Samuel's position that sent him stumbling. "Mama!" Samuel's voice cracked with fear. One of the front riders had broken through, was heading straight for their position on horseback, pistol raised. Time seemed to slow. Mary swung the shotgun up, knowing it was empty, knowing she had no time to reload. The rider was 20 feet away. 15. 10. And then Eli's rifle cracked, and the rider jerked sideways, tumbling from his horse. But the victory was short-lived. Mary heard a sound that turned her insides to ice. Clara screaming. She whirled around to see one of Caldwell's men dragging her daughter from beneath the cottonwood tree, his hand clamped over the girl's mouth. "No!" Mary was running before she even knew she'd moved, abandoning her position, abandoning strategy, abandoning everything except the primal need to reach her child. The man saw her coming and raised his pistol, but he never got the shot off. A figure slammed into him from the side. Samuel, small but fearless, attacking with nothing but his bare hands. The impact made the man drop Clara, but it also brought his full attention to the 9-year-old boy. Mary watched in horror as the man backhanded Samuel, sending him sprawling. Then he raised his pistol again, this time pointed at her son. Something inside Mary broke, or maybe it finally, fully awakened. She didn't have a gun, didn't have a rock. All she had was rage and love and the absolute certainty that no one was going to hurt her children. She hit the man like a storm, clawing, biting, fighting with a ferocity that shocked even her. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, and somewhere in the chaos, the pistol went off. Mary felt the heat of it, felt the shock wave, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. When Eli finally pulled her off, the man wasn't moving. Mary was covered in blood. His, hers, she couldn't tell. Samuel and Clara were both sobbing, clinging to her. And Caldwell's remaining men were retreating, fleeing back toward town, their courage broken by the widow who'd fought like a wild thing to protect her own. But Caldwell himself hadn't run. He sat on his horse at the edge of the clearing, staring at the carnage, at the bodies of his men, at the woman who'd ruined his perfect plan. "This ain't over," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "You hear me, Haskell? This ain't over." Eli raised his rifle, but Caldwell was already gone, spurring his horse into a gallop. Silence fell over the ridge. The kind of silence that comes after something irreversible, after lines have been crossed that can never be uncrossed. Mary sank to her knees, pulling her children close, and began to shake. They'd won. They'd survived. But the cost was written in blood on the ground, and Mary knew, she knew, that Caldwell was right. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The aftermath was brutal in its own way. Eli and Mary worked in grim silence, doing what needed to be done, tending wounds, gathering weapons, preparing for what might come next. Samuel had a split lip and a bruise blooming across his cheek. Clara wouldn't speak, just held her mother's hand and stared at nothing. "We can't stay here," Eli said as they sat by the fire that evening. "Caldwell will bring the law next time, or more guns. Either way, we won't win." "So we run," Mary said flatly. "We survive," Eli corrected. "There's a difference." But before they could discuss it further, they heard horses again. Mary grabbed the shotgun, her body going rigid with exhaustion and dread. They couldn't fight again. They just couldn't. But the two riders who appeared weren't Caldwell's men. One was an older man with a silver beard, wearing a marshal's badge. The other was younger, dressed in a suit that looked out of place in this dusty wilderness. "Don't shoot," the marshal called out, raising his hands. "We're not here for trouble. I'm Marshal Webb from the county seat. This here is Mr. Patterson from the land office." Eli kept his rifle trained on them. "State your business." Webb dismounted slowly, keeping his movements obvious and non-threatening. "We heard there was a shooting. Caldwell rode into town claiming you murdered 6 of his men in cold blood." "Self-defense," Eli said. "They attacked us." "I believe you," Webb said, surprising them both. Wade Caldwell's had complaints filed against him in 3 counties. Problem is, he's got money and friends in high places. But, he gestured to Patterson, "Mr. Patterson here has been investigating some irregularities in land transfers. Seems Mr. Caldwell has been falsifying documents to seize properties." Mary's heart leapt. "The Haskell claim." Patterson nodded, pulling papers from his saddlebag. "Among others, your husband's signature was forged, Mrs. Haskell. The land was never legally transferred, which means Caldwell's been operating on your property illegally for 8 months. The words didn't make sense at first. Mary's mind struggled to process them. "The land, it's still ours." "Was never not yours," Patterson said. "But that's not all. Caldwell's also wanted for fraud in Colorado territory. Federal marshals have been looking for him for 2 years. When he rode into town today, covered in blood and screaming about vengeance, well, he made it real easy for me to send a telegram." Webb grinned. "U.S. Marshals should be here by tomorrow. Caldwell's finally going to face justice." Mary felt tears streaming down her face, but she couldn't tell if they were from relief or disbelief or simple exhaustion. "And the shooting today?" "Far as I'm concerned," Webb said, "you and Mr. Carter defended your legal property from armed trespassers. Can't say I'd have done different in your position." As the marshal and Patterson rode away, taking statements, promising to return, talking about restitution and property rights, Mary stood in the clearing and let it all wash over her. The land was theirs. Caldwell was finished. They'd actually won. But the victory felt hollow. She'd killed a man today. So had Eli. Her children had witnessed violence no child should ever see. What they'd gained had been purchased with blood and trauma, and she didn't know if any of them would ever be whole again. Eli found her later, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching the sun set over the land that was somehow, impossibly, still hers. "You did good today," he said quietly. "I killed someone. You protected your children. There's a difference." Mary shook her head. "Is there? I can still feel it, Eli. The moment when I stopped being human and became something else, something capable of surviving," he finished. "That's all you did. Survive." She turned to look at him, this man who'd fought beside her, bled beside her, stood between her family and destruction without hesitation. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do it? You could have let us go, could have saved yourself." Eli was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I've spent too many years running from things, running from grief, from the past, from connections that might hurt. And then you walked into that diner, and I saw something I thought I'd lost, a reason to stand still, a reason to fight for something instead of just against things." Mary's breath caught. "Eli, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know, whatever happens next, whatever you decide, about the land, about us, about anything, I'll understand. But I'm done running, Mary. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay, help you rebuild, help raise those kids, be something other than a ghost passing through." The words hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest and terrifying. Mary thought about everything they'd been through, the violence, the fear, the moments when death had seemed certain. But she also thought about the quiet mornings, the music by the fire, the way Eli had taught Samuel to tie knots and made Clara laugh. She thought about Thomas and what he would have wanted for her. Not endless grief, not loneliness, but life. Full, messy, complicated life. "Stay," she whispered. Eli's eyes widened. "You mean it? Stay. Help me rebuild. Be there when the nightmares come. Be there when Clara finally speaks again. Be there when Samuel grows taller than both of us. Just stay." He pulled her close then, and for the first time since Thomas died, Mary let herself lean into someone. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind them. They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, as the first stars emerged, as the land that had tried so hard to break them finally offered its grudging acceptance. Two broken souls learning to be whole again. Two survivors finding their way toward something that looked like hope. But in town, Wade Caldwell sat in a cell, and his rage grew with every passing hour. The marshals wouldn't arrive until morning, and Caldwell had friends, dangerous friends who owed him favors. The battle was over. But the war was just beginning. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, hit that subscribe button. Because the best stories, the ones that matter, are the ones that remind us we're all survivors in our own way, and we're just getting started. More tales of courage, redemption, and the human spirit coming soon. Don't miss what happens next.